Revolutionary greetings. This is Victor Coronado alongside Nick Ayala and Carlos Cruz Mosquera. This is Anticonquista. You can find us at anticonquista.com. We're also on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're on Twitter. This is now the 11th episode of Nuestra America, a weekly news roundup of things happening in Latin America. This week's theme and title of the program is Scientific Socialists versus Conspiracy Theorists, the struggle for Latin American critical thought. Comrades, how we doing?
All good, comrade.
All right. So who wants to begin? Let's set it off. Scientific Socialists versus Conspiracy Theorists. Your thoughts?
So like we were saying just before coming on there, it's a broad topic. And what we want to do tonight is basically, it's something that I don't know about you guys, but growing up, like in our community, in the Latin community here in London, we would always have that in school, like the debates. Like I remember when the whole Illuminati thing came about, like it was everywhere, and like people discussing it, like it was like it was a matter of fact. Like for sure, there's Illuminati running the show and getting us to do wild shit and believe in wild things and so it's a thing in our community to believe certain conspiracy theories. I guess the kind of way that conspiracy theories work are kind of similar to how religion works, which is based on So that's where you pitch it against science. Where is the evidence? How do you arrive to these conclusions? Where do you get your information from? And conspiracy theories and religion have a lot in common when it comes to that. It's scripture, or it's you don't really question who the source is. Is it reliable? Who said it? And like we said before coming on there, we don't want to take this moral high ground or act as if we're looking down on these conspiracy theories and theorists in our community, or these religious people in our community. It's not about that, but it is about critiquing how we I guess consume information, where we what is reliable sources for us, because at the end of the day, all of this boils down to what are we going to do with that information. Is it going to make us act and try and transform society? Is it going to make us feel more solidarity with what's going on around the world? Is it going to make us spring into action? And what we would argue, what I would argue today, is that conspiracy theories tend, and oftentimes religions, but not all the time, tend to paralyze us, tend to kind of keep us in a kind of mode where we accept that there's injustice or something evil in the world, but there's nothing to do about it. We just have to either leave it to God, or if we're religious, or if we are conspiracy theorists, we have to leave it to I don't know, fate, or I don't know, I'm not sure what, but conspiracy theorists tend to just be online and not really want to transform the world, not really want to be revolutionary agents in terms of changing the conditions of the world. So that would be my first thoughts on that.
Yeah. So one of the things I guess I think is first important to bring up, we were kind of talking about this before, is conspiracy theory is a broad topic. So it's a lot of different things we could touch on. I would start with touching on, like, well, what do we even mean? How do we even define what a conspiracy theory is, or what conspiracy theories are? I remember when I first, I think I've said this on previous Anticonquista broadcasts. I really got into them before I was into socialism. I spent like a good year, maybe, just like diving deep into like UFOs and all these alien conspiracies. And you'll find crazy shit out there. People will be like, I have a whole anthology of every whatever species exists in the universe, and it's total bullshit, right? They get it out of nowhere. They just make shit up. But I was into that, and I think to some extent, some of the folks who are into conspiracy theories is it's a matter of like critical thinking. It's a matter of like they actually want to investigate things, but they're just going about it the wrong way, or they're relying on sources which are are not trusted or not well researched. And we'll probably talk about that later. But I think too, part of what conspiracy theory really means is like, let's break down the word. It means like conspiring to do something, right? And that really is something that happens all the time. There's constant conspiring to do things. And so I like to think of conspiracy theories in another way too, where it's like all of the things that we hear in the US and the imperialist propaganda, that's bullshit. That there was a revolution in Cuba in July this past year, that there's this that the Chinese are like committing a genocide against Muslims, that the Syrian government was using chemical warfare, that Venezuela, Cuba are dictatorships. Those are all conspiracy theories. Those are all based on completely no evidence. It's completely falsified. It's like the whole Russia stole the election thing. It's made up bullshit that's really just meant to like Carlos said, paralyze our people into thinking that, we're being undermined by some nefarious group that we can't do anything about, and our ruling class, our leaders, our nation is going to protect us from it. And it's bullshit, right? It's a complete lie. But those are intentionally made conspiracy theories thought up by US, UK, Western imperialists in order to confuse and make our people hate actual revolutionary social movements on the ground. And I think that's important to think about, how we how we imagine conspiracy theories.
I would argue, I would agree with most of that, but I would disagree. Like the majority of the time, I don't think is a conscious kind of decision of, I don't know if that's what you were saying, Nick, but like a conscious decision of the imperialists to try and paralyze us with this thing. I think coincidentally it helps. It helps them because it does paralyze us. I don't think there is a push necessarily, or a conscious push to try and make us believe, well, particularly like Illuminati and that kind of thing. Like I don't think it's a conscious thing of the empire of these governments to push it out there. But yeah, it definitely does help them, because it mystifies the situation. It makes it into this supernatural kind of situation where there's very little you can do apart from accept it as a fact. And I wanted to add also, like, a lot of this comes from David Icke, this British guy. I don't know if you guys have heard of him. He's this British guy who used to be a footballer or a soccer player, as you guys call it. And in one interview, he comes on, I think it was on the BBC, and he starts talking about like reptiles being in power and taking over the world, and he became super famous because of it. Like lots of attention. I guess people out there kind of had some track. So he got a massive following, and a lot of those conspiracy theories comes from this guy. And the nonsense that he comes out with, like the whole reptile thing, he took it from a movie like in the 1960s or 70s. I think it's called V, and it's exactly that. It's this sci-fi movie about aliens like invading the world and camouflaging in political and in the monarchies, and it is ridiculous. It is a very ridiculous proposition. But yeah, a lot of us, unfortunately, a lot of our community are influenced directly or indirectly by this guy David Icke. He's a charlatan. And also to say that he's not just a crazy guy. He's not crazy. I wouldn't say he's crazy at all. He's very intelligent and very logical, because he earns millions of pounds. He's earned millions of pounds over the decades spouting this rubbish to people.
Yeah, that's the thing too. A lot of these folks who lead these theories are, they're scammers, right? It's all about money. It's all about making money off of our people. And I think too, I wouldn't even say it's a disagreement, Carlos. I think we're just talking about two different types of conspiracy theories. Like, there's ones where the government conspires to put out false propaganda and really, confuse people, and then there's ones that are made by like these scammers and grifters.
All right, got you. Yeah.
And I think too, like, because there was a case recently here in Jersey where actually that happened. You had a woman who basically was creating fake coronavirus vaccine cards, and she was like putting people into the system and acting like they were they were vaccinated when they weren't, and she was making $100-$200 off of each card. And so it's crazy to me, because you'll have people talk about the deep state, or like these big corporations, or these rich individuals who are like plotting to take over the world, and they're doing it through all these money schemes. Meanwhile, the person that you're following is a scam artist who's taking your money. It's how a lot of these operations tend to work, though.
So let me chime in by saying that. So I've always said that conspiracy theories are very sexy. They require very little research to be done. And what happens is that, instead of doing that, the tough work of like sitting there and investigating and thoroughly vetting your information, what's the source, who is the source, what you do is you learn of these conspiracy theories, either through some weird documentary or some meme that somebody put on Instagram or Twitter, and you regurgitate it, and without actually doing any real fact checking. And as far as what this means for our people, well, one, it's dangerous because it confuses a lot of people, and Carlos, as you said, it just makes us it does paralyze us, right? And it mystifies the world, and it's not complicated really when you start studying the history and legacy of white supremacy and colonialism and capitalism and imperialism. Like, you don't need conspiracy theories, because we have facts, we have historical documents, we have things that we can point to. In terms of being a social scientist or a scientific socialist, it's not hard to do if you really apply yourself. And this is why it's important for people to, if you're an individual and you're trying to interpret what's happening in the world and want to make a difference, right? Because it's not enough to just interpret the world. We have to change the world. And it's important to link up with organizations that would be able to give you a materialist understanding of the world. You hear in the streets all the time, mind over matter, the Illuminati, right? All these, or in our communities, and look, not to, I have to be careful. I'm not trying to, I don't want to diss Papa Dios, my mother, is very religious. My family's very religious, so on and so forth. So, I get how important that is for our people. I understand that. That being said, I've heard so many times, my mom and my aunts and my uncles who still speak no English to this day and been here for 30, 40 years, they say, vamos a dejar eso en la mano de Dios. Dios va a resolver todo. No se preocupe, que eso va a estar en la mano de Dios. And I've heard people repeat this over and over. And you think about that. When you think about the fact that Christopher Columbus, who was a terrorist, colonialism was just terrorism, right? These were land grabs, and these were genocidal maniacs who brought the sword and the Bible to the region, right? And so when you think about this has probably been going on for 500 years, where you just, just leave it up to God. God's going to take care of it. Revolutionary socialists say, nah, that's not how. We have the ability to change things. We have the ability to organize ourselves. We have the ability to say that class right there is oppressing us, and they're exploiting us. And you can easily identify who your enemy is. And so you use these tools. You become a materialist. You become of this world and try to interpret this world as it is, as we know it to be true, by looking at documents, by reading certain historical books, historical documents, and saying this is the truth. Whether or not conspiracy by definition means that people are organizing in a secret way for an intended goal. And they don't want you to know that they're doing it because it's secret, right? So this idea of trying to, of mystifying everything and saying, well, it's just some secret and we're not part of that club because these secret societies control everything. And, it does become like almost like this movie-like thing that you start playing out in your head. And it makes us, it does paralyze us and makes us impotent. And you're just like, well, we can't do anything about it. And that's where, that's where I would encourage people to study Marxism and become a communist and become and study these revolutionary movements and study people like Malcolm X and the Black Panthers and the Young Lords and so on and so forth, because these are people who took power into their own hands and said, no, fuck that. We're going to change this reality. We're not going to leave it up to some mystical, and again, no disrespect, we're not going to live it up to some mystical being. We're going to take control over our own lives, and we're going to determine what our future is going to look like. And so I think, that's the danger of conspiracy theories in our community. And they're very sexy and they're very popular. They require very little effort.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and I would say exactly that. Like it is appealing, and it's understandable why our people would be attracted to it. It is appealing, like the narratives and the story, and I heard a lot of and I've read around, like, conspiracy theories have this kind of a particular conspiracy theories act like clubs, like secret clubs that you're in on this information, and it's like only you know this, and maybe you are going to be brave enough to like change, or but it's always like a very like like the end of it all is that something that other people don't know, and like you're above other people because you know this thing, but there's nothing really that comes off of it. Because okay, right, fine, like you think the world is fucked up and is being led by reptilians. Okay, what are you gonna do about it? If it is the case, it would help us as scientific socialists or as communists or socialists, whatever you want to call it. It would help us if you wanted to, be like, fuck it, let's go against these elites, whatever you think they are. But they don't. Like that's not how it works. Like it's really just. I think deep down, a lot of the people that believe in these conspiracy theories don't really believe in what they're saying, and it is just about being in a club and having the feeling that you know something that other people don't know.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on like religion real quick, and I think too, we were talking like we said, we were talking about this beforehand. We talk about how religion can be paralyzing, how how I see it is it sucks that autonomy and that power that our people have. It takes the power out of the individual, out of the communities, and puts it into the hands of some unknown being, right? Whether it be mystical or whatever it might be. And I think that's a problem. That's where religion becomes a problem, when it starts to disempower our own people. And it tells them, look, just wait until the afterlife. Then everything will be better. You don't have to worry about today. Or wait until, this thing may be deadly, may be dangerous, but, God will take care of it or whatever. That's disempowering, right? But, Victor mentions Malcolm X, and Malcolm X, look, he was religious for a good portion of his life. But he used religion not in a way to disempower people. He used it to empower people, right? And I think that's one of the key differences in why we, at least for me, I'm not religious, but I have a lot of respect for religion, and I would never take that away from people. And I've seen even in the organizing movement, a lot of the people who organize, especially here in the United States, are very religious. And they're coming out of mosques, and they're coming out of different churches, and that's usually because those folks they're not being disempowered by their religion. They're being empowered by the religion. And the sad thing is they are a minority, I think, in the overall religious aspect, but it's an important and it's a strong minority, at least here in the US. Now we can go to places like Nicaragua, we can see like liberation theology, and we've just seen how powerful that's been. And it's not even just I remember when we were talking to the Nicaraguan brother who came on to the show with us. He wasn't even I don't think he was like a Christian or a Catholic. He said what was the religion he followed, Victor? It was like
I can't recall.
He said it was like Eastern European or something like that, right?
No, well, his name. I questioned him on his name because, and this was we did that off air actually. I said, how are you Nicaraguan and your last name is, I believe his last name is Smith or something like that. So I was messing with him a little bit. And then he said, no, listen, so this is what happened in terms of my lineage. But no, it was, I don't think it had anything to do with the religion when we were on that topic.
Yeah, but I remember he mentioned it during the podcast a little bit.
Oh, did he? Okay.
About like the indigenous community he came from and the religion they had. But either way, it's interesting, right? Like folks can use religion in a powerful and a meaningful way, but there's also ways where it's either a scam, like you got these people on TV who are like preachers who make millions of dollars, or it's a lie, like it's disempowering. It's telling you to just accept the conditions that you're living in now, and no matter how awful they are. But we need to kind of reframe that in a way where it's not disempowering anymore.
Yeah, and I would echo that with our comrade Rich, who's also part of Anticonquista. He's never on here. He's like the background guy doing all the posters and the website and all of that kind of stuff.
Shout out to Rich. Shout out to Rich.
Yeah. Yeah, and he messaged earlier on in the chat, and he was like, he didn't outright just put religion to one side, which a lot of us tend to do. I'm guilty of that as an atheist. But he said, leave spirituality, leave spiritual contradictions to spirituality, and leave the material world and the material conditions and what we need to do in the world to revolution and to socialism. Something like that. I'm paraphrasing, but he said something like that, and I think that's the kind of approach we need to take. As I guess as a socialist and communist is, we and you know what, Karl Marx said that religion is the opium of the people, and I think I heard somebody say one time, like, he didn't mean it to be like, oh, you guys are dumb, like it's putting you to, like, religion's putting you to sleep. He didn't mean it like that. He meant it like religion is the opium of the people. Like opium was used to alleviate pain. So it makes sense that, in this fucked up world that we live in this fucked up conditions, especially our people who, the global South, we tend to be the more religious, unfortunately, because of the circumstances. I would argue the historical conditions, historical circumstances, we tend to be more religious. And it's understandable why. It's understandable why, because of, you're trying to get away from this terrible reality. But it's also true that the global South is the more revolutionary region of the world for the same reasons. So yeah, and also to mention Camilo Torres' liberation theology in Colombia as well, and how yeah, like, we have guerrilla fighters like Camilo Torres who gave their lives to try and end the suffering, the material suffering of the people, who used the teachings of Jesus in the Bible to justify violent revolution against the bourgeoisie. So it can be used. It can be used as a tool, and yeah, we do have to respect it. I know we were getting a bit of slack from people for using the image of Jesus Christ with the conspiracy theory on the poster, with the conspiracy theorist side, but like we were saying at the beginning, there are, we do have to argue the fact that, if we're for science, we need empirical evidence. We need to be serious about what sources we use for our information. Unfortunately, religion, with all respect, there's no empirical evidence, I would argue, for it. There's no scientific evidence that would suggest that there is a God or that there is something supernatural. But saying that, again, like we've been saying, we do have to respect people's spiritual views and let them practice their spirituality, and at the same time, as communists, as Latin American communists, try and persuade our people to not leave their religion, but take up the struggle to change our material conditions right now.
Yeah, want to point out that Malcolm X, and someone said it in the comment section. I said I responded back by saying I'm going to talk about that now. Malcolm X, remember that he started off with the Nation of Islam, right? Left the Nation of Islam, and at the end, he was very specific about this. He created 2 different organizations. He created his, I believe it was a mosque, to deal with the question of religion. And then he created the, I believe the name of the organization was the OAAU, the Organization of Afro-American Unity, I believe it was the name. And he said, he was very specific. He said, look, I'm doing this intentionally on purpose. And again, I'm paraphrasing, but we're doing this on purpose. We're going to split it. The Organization of Afro-American Unity is going to deal with the question of politics within the Black community, no matter what your religion is, no matter what you believe in. And he said something to the extent of, if we start talking about religion, if we mix religion and politics, we're just going to be all over the place. So he's very specific. So he separated those 2 things. And that was genius on his part, right? With the question of Jesus being on the conspiracy theory side, just the fact that, by the way, if Jesus did exist, nobody really knows what the hell he looked like, right? So the fact that we immediately identify that image that everyone sees everywhere of this white Jesus, you know exactly what we're talking about, right? Without even, because it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere, right? One of the things that bugged me out when I spent time in Dominican Republic is that I'm going to people's homes, and look, I always get people always tell me, hey, you don't look Dominican, Victor. And I know what they mean, whether they consciously or subconsciously are saying this, or unconsciously, I guess, saying this, is that what they're saying is that you don't look Black, right? Because overwhelmingly, Dominican people are Black, right? And it bugged me out that I would go visit. I visited so many homes in the Dominican Republic when I was out there for 8 months and organizing. And here's a Black people praying to a white Jesus. You would literally, I would go to people's homes and it would be like revolutionaries' homes, like it would be Fidel, you see Che, you see Hugo Chavez, and then you see Papa Dios, you see white Jesus Christ. It bugged me out. It just literally bugged me out. And we have to let's be intellectually honest. Many conspiracy theories, especially with the issue of COVID right now, are coming from the extreme right and the religious right. And we can't deny that. We have to be honest about it. And so for me, I do draw the line there. I'm very respectful of religion. I believe people have a right to believe in, whatever God they want to believe in and pray to whatever God. I think you're never, history has taught us you're never going to be able to take that away from people. And we have to be respectful of that. That being said, I do draw the line when you start mixing religion and science, right? Or trying to have religion trump science, right? And we're having this problem now. And I'm gonna say, something, a scientific tenet is, you hear scientists say this all the time. Correlation is not causation. I will repeat that to the day that I die when anything science related. And you can apply that towards politics. Correlation is not causation. What does that mean? Just because 2 variables are correlated with one another doesn't mean that one is the cause of the other. And oftentimes, when we're talking about conspiracy theories, or when people start making up conspiracy theories, it's because they'll see correlation and they immediately say this is causation. And so if you want to be a scientist, you have to understand that correlation is not causation. And one of the things I keep hearing is like, well, big pharma is evil and bad. And I grant you, and the government is bad. The US government is bad. So then, because big pharma has a terrible background, which I think we could all agree on. I think, there's a better way to organize this stuff and to create, biotechnology and whatnot. And they should be reined in. There should be more regulatory. There should be, especially, I don't know if you folks have been following the whole opiate things. I lost a great friend to that situation on a drug overdose. And so I follow that. And like, they pretty much get slaps on the wrist, right? Knowing that they created this opiate crisis and they were culpable in creating this opiate crisis. They knew exactly what was happening. They knew that people were getting addicted to these drugs. They were overprescribing people. It was a whole racket. And these big corporations just get slapped on the wrist. Nothing happens. Nobody goes to jail. Nobody gets executed. Nothing, right? So going back to my point of, okay, big pharma is bad. The US government is bad. So the COVID vaccine has to be bad. It has to be, right? Because those things are correlated, those things. So, and it's just people I hate, I hate to say this, but some things are nuanced, and some things you do have to break down and try to understand. When Cuban scientists are looking at the Pfizer medication and saying, yeah, that's a pretty good vaccine, right? The pandemic is global. By definition, it's a global thing. So there's this weird conspiracy theory out there that the government is trying to get us and trying to kill us and trying to wipe us all out, and that also the vaccine is a part of that. This thing is affecting capitalist and socialist societies. Both scientists in both capitalist and socialist societies are grappling with this issue, and they collaborate with one another and they talk to one another. They don't care that one lives in a capital. Maybe they do politically, but in terms of science, in terms of what's really happening out there, they don't give a shit that one lives in a capitalist society, the other one's in a socialist society. They don't care. They talk to each other. The world is shrunk because of technology, so they talk to one another. They have different threads and forums and stuff like that where they share information and they share studies. This idea that somehow China is in cahoots with the government of Israel, with the United States, with the government of Iran, with the government of Russia, with Cuba, it's absurd. They're enemies. They're political enemies. So this idea that somehow this pandemic was man-made and this is intentional and they're all trying to get us, all the Illuminati is trying to kill us all. It's, with all due respect to everyone out there, it's a little loony when you really try to break it down and when you really try to make sense of it all. It doesn't make any logical sense.
Yeah. And I know I agree with you, Victor. I you talking about that, I just wanted to add on too, like, it's crazy because you have, like you said, socialist countries that are opposed to the United States that are literally doing the exact same thing or saying like this is just as serious an issue as they're saying it is. How did I know? I always joke about this with my friends. How did I know the COVID vaccines were legit? Because I knew, right? I was thinking, well, if these medicines are legit, where are they going to go to first? They're going to go to white, wealthy suburbs first. And you sure as hell, that's exactly what happened. And there was a disparity. Sure as hell, what happened after that? Then there was a vaccine apartheid. And now 70% of the globe, human population, mostly in the global south, has no access to vaccines. Why do you think that is? Because there's some conspiracy to inject you with microchips to get you? Nah, man. What they're trying to do is they're trying to just get they're trying to hoard all of the medicine for themselves. If you can't see that at this point, it's because you're deliberately not trying to see, right? And it's crazy to me because we have people right now in the comments. I'm just looking through the comments, like we have people right now saying this shit. And this
is a good one. Victor Coronado uses CIA and corporate arguments against COVID skeptics. So are you saying then also the Cuban government is also using CIA and corporate arguments against COVID skeptics? Are you saying that China is using CIA and corporate arguments against COVID skeptics? Are you saying the government of Iran is also doing the same thing? Because that's what you're saying when you say that to me. Right. Because no communist believes that.
Right. And I think too, like just like you said, it's like, do you have to apply? You have to apply the standard to every country in the world, right? But people don't do that. They'll try to say, well, there's something else. You'll hear all these folks talk about big pharma, the deep state, and they're now like popular journalists who I've seen who are now trying to use these talking points because they're opportunists. They want that following. Look, there is no deep state, in my opinion. There are different parts of the bourgeoisie and the elite ruling class who fight amongst each other. That's what it is. That's what you're trying to describe. But rather than try to describe that process and look at it through material, like scientific socialism and through materialism, you're adding this layer of like mysticism and almost like a spirituality of like, there's this hidden figure called the deep state with all of these nefarious actors that are trying to plot to take over the world. That doesn't exist. That's not real, right? These people are fighting amongst themselves. And someone asked a good question earlier on that I saw in the comments. Someone asked, like, what do you think about these theories that have a little bit, a shred of truth to them? Like maybe one thing that they talk about is kind of true. Well, you got to understand how these conspiracy theories work. What they'll do is they'll take something which is true, right? Or maybe like a little bit true or partially true. They'll take that and they'll mischaracterize it. They'll mislabel it. They'll start going off in a totally new direction. And just to try to justify and legitimate themselves, they'll go back to that one truth and they'll be like, look, this is true, so everything else that we have to say must be true, right? You know, QAnon will say some shit like, look, you don't like the Democrats, you don't like these politicians, they're corrupt, they're bad, they must be Satan worshipers, no? Like, that is like, you just take this little bit of truth and you just go off the fucking rails with it, and that's, you know, that's bullshit. People need to look really people really need to like do more investigations, really what it's about.
Yeah, and I would also say, again, going back to, you know, not blaming people for going down this route. I would also add that not a lot of us, especially, you know, those of us who come from, you know, we're here, you know, we do this for the Latin American diaspora, and, you know, for example, here in the UK, in London particularly, you know, a lot of us grow up in underprivileged areas with like really bad schooling. A lot of us don't make it in academia at all. We come out, if we do academia, we do like business studies, things that aren't really about like critical thinking and or the sciences, and yeah, so it's understandable why we're not prepared to you know to be critical thinkers, really. And I think that was the subheading of this particular talk is you know, the battle for critical thinking in Latin America, and that, you know, that's partly, and you know, ironically, that's what it really boils down to, is that we, because of the conditions that we live in, don't have the education or the access to education and to educational tools to be able to properly think for ourselves. And on that point, you know, as Latin Americans, maybe we should look at Paulo Freire's work about critical thinking in our critical education in our society. You know, making sure that we're not, you know, just allowing our people to be, you know, ourselves to be indoctrinated by the state and by everything else, you know, these conspiracy theories, religion, spirituality, and so on. Like, we do have to, as a people, become critical thinkers. We do need to try and become more scientific in the way we look at the world, because otherwise, you know, we're just gonna revolve as a community. We're just gonna you know, continue being this community that's oppressed and that has no answers. Unfortunately, the diaspora, we're in quite a bad state politically because of that. Because we're not critical thinkers, because we're so underdeveloped when it comes to our political consciousness, which is connected to education as well. So yeah, we do need to, you know, pull our socks up and try and combat that in our communities.
So the one individual, I'm presuming, I'm going to presume your sex because it says on Dixie, but if I'm being presumptuous, I apologize. Look, if you want to send me some, I'm not hard to find. A lot of people, by the way, I appreciate the audience, because you folks, a lot of people have been reaching out to me on Facebook. I'm not hard to find. You can find me on Facebook. But if you can find something, now she's attacking all of us. If you can find something to change my mind as a scientific socialist, I'm always willing to change my position on anything when presented with new facts and new evidence, right? And so if you want to look me up on Facebook and you want to send me something, I'm not going to question your revolutionary credentials or your leftist credentials, but, you know, certainly, you know, reach out to me if you can send us stuff. But just some other things I wanted to talk about with this, and these are some talking points I just put for myself. You know, when people are looking at, if you're looking at specifically on the question of science and health, and that's something that fascinates me personally. There are a lot of really good scientific journals. I recommend you please, you know, vet what your source and make sure that you have a good source. But just a couple things to keep in mind when it comes to studies, because journalists could be really good at reporting certain things, but sometimes they don't even understand what they're reporting sometimes. So a lot of times journalists will put out epidemiological or report on epidemiological studies, which are the weakest types of studies in the scientific community. Like no serious scientist takes them seriously. They raise eyebrows, they create curiosity, they may lead to future studies, but they show correlation, not causation. They're essentially like sort of surveys of people, of individuals, and then they collect the data and then they put it out there. The gold standard of scientific studies are double-blind, randomized, controlled trials. And so people, when you Google this stuff, it's not really hard to look at a study. And you don't even need to, a lot of times you don't need to read every single detail of the study, but you can read the abstract, you can read the body and then the conclusion, and it'll give you an idea. And even then, as a scientist, you cannot make a definitive statement based off of one trial, right? One randomized controlled trial. But you are able to make statements, or certain statements with a higher degree of confidence. And then if you get a meta-analysis done, which is, let me give the definition for this. A meta-analysis is a statistical analysis that combines the result of multiple scientific studies. So it's essentially a study of studies. And meta-analysis can be performed when there are multiple scientific studies addressing the same question, with each individual study reporting measurements that are expected to have some degree of error. The aim then is to use approaches from statistics to derive a pooled estimate closest to the unknown common truth based on how this error is perceived. So again, you have epidemiological studies, you have the gold standard, which is double-blind, randomized controlled trials, and then you have meta-analyses. And even like that, I'll give an example. Ibuprofen, which is a wonderful drug. Che Guevara touted the wonders of this drug. I love ibuprofen myself. I use it sparingly. I don't use it all the time because it's not meant to be used all the time. You're not supposed to be using it all the time, but it's a wonderful anti-inflammatory drug. All right. Guess what? Even as effective as ibuprofen is, and it's very, very, very effective. It's very, very effective on certain individuals. And this is true of many drugs. There are certain drugs I can take and both of you can take, and it won't work for me, but it'll both work for the both of you. I believe ibuprofen has something like a 65 or 70% effective rate or something like that, whatever the actual term is. In other words, 70% of the population will take it and will be able to reduce inflammation. But that's what practicing medicine is, and that's what science is. You're practicing certain drugs on people and saying, and that's how we figure out, hey, certain off-label drugs will work on certain individuals because certain doctors will give it and prescribe it for one thing, and then the patient comes back and says, hey, doc, I know you gave it to me for this, but I got this amazing benefit from it. And then all of a sudden the doctor goes, that's interesting. And then over 20 years of practicing medicine, he realizes that, hey, sometimes drug X, while being prescribed for this particular issue, may also work for this particular, even if we don't have scientific studies to prove it. And that's the whole idea of practicing. I mean, it's a whole world of real science, of real application, of really trying to understand how this stuff works. And I'm saying all that because I do want people to be scientists in your own right, as opposed to, well, these two things are correlated, or somebody put this meme over here and this kind of makes sense to me, so I'm going to just regurgitate it and have this conversation, say, yo, this is what's really happening. Let's stop doing that, because we don't need to do that. We have scientific studies when we're talking about health and science, and we have gold standards for those. If we're talking about the world, the economy, politics, society, we have historical documents, we have government records, we have history books well documented. So, that was kind of like, again, the whole overarching theme of this is like, please be scientists. You don't need to be a loony, crazy, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but you don't need to regurgitate all these crazy conspiracy theories that are out there, because, again, they're ineffective. They don't do anything. It leaves you impotent and paralyzed, and they do nothing for our community. It just creates more confusion.
Yeah, and so I wanted to take it back to like the more practical applications, because I think you're right, Victor. Like a lot of folks, you call yourself a socialist, then you got to be a scientific socialist, or else you're nothing. So we have to be scientists. But And I would, the only thing I would disagree with those is it hasn't done nothing for our community. It's harmed our community, right? And we can see, we can actually, and it's crazy to me because we got people who aren't even from our community. In other words, who aren't Latino, who are pushing these conspiracy theories, and who are the people who are suffering? Latinos, right? And we have the evidence to show that, like just for COVID, right? For COVID, we've seen that there are, so for example, in New Jersey, there's between the ages of 18 to 50, um, Latinos make up about 12% of the population. Yet during the pandemic so far, half of the people aged 18 to 50 in New Jersey that have died have been Latino men, right? So even though we only represent 12% of the population, most of our people are dying because they're mostly essential workers, right? The ones who are getting infected the most and who have the highest case rate are Latinas, right? Because again, they're essential workers. And because our people are living in homes where we're all living together, you know, the nuclear family plus the extended family, the case rate has just been exponential. Our people right now, like, you know, there's studies being done right now that are showing that children who are being born or who are, like, you know, very young right now are going to be being raised without their parents, like Latino children, right? Because their parents have died from COVID. Or our people, while you know, while the white population had, you know, they were saying COVID's affecting the elderly, people over 65. Our people who are actually still working because they were forced, you know, they still had to work during the pandemic for money because they were essential workers, whatever it was. Our people were dying at a much younger age, right? So this has like a real world impact, and this is kind of what pisses me off so much is that you people talk like these theories, especially when it comes to COVID, they talk so much shit about how it's not real, all this. In the real world, our people are actually dying from it, like at rates that they can't even imagine, and they're not being impacted at all, which is why they can keep repeating this bullshit because it doesn't apply to them, right? They're not seeing the deaths, they're not in the hospitals watching children die, they're not doing any of that. And that's kind of what pisses me off. Is like you're talking out of your ass. Meanwhile, we're suffering. And I've got, you know, I lose all respect for that because it's ridiculous. And it's not even just, you know, it's not even just the deaths either. Look at the unemployment, right? Right now, Latinos have they've suffered the most when it comes to unemployment. We've had during the pandemic, it was a 20% unemployment rate for Latinos. That's 1 in 5 households. That's crazy. That's crazy high, right? But people don't care, right? They care more about their conspiracy theories and the little cliques and circles that they like to run in. And again, it's, I think Carlos made it clear too. Like, it's not, we're not trying to blame. Like, I will, me personally, I would blame some people, like people who have platforms, people who have a lot of influence and who are putting out this information. I blame them. The people who follow it and who just go along with it, like, you know, there's still a chance, I think, to win them back over. But for those who really have a platform, it's just gross, man. Like, you're killing people, you know, or you don't even care about human lives.
Yeah, super responsible to, you know, especially now, like you say, Nick, during the pandemic. Actually, myself and Nick wrote an article a while back on vaccines and basically making an argument. You know, this was way back when the vaccines started being rolled out, and we made the argument that, you know, our community should most definitely get vaccinated. And you can find the article on Anticonquista, as well as the monthly review online who reposted it. And also an infographic that we're about to put out on that a similar topic, which shows a report that shows that that Latinos, especially young Latin Americans, are suffering from poverty because of the pandemic. And again, as Nick was saying, like, high proportions of our community in the US, particularly being affected by it, and particularly what's happening in terms of their finances. That, you know, a lot of us are working class, we don't have savings, and a lot of our family, our older members of our family, depend on us. So that leaves us in even more in an even more dire financial situation. So yeah, so all of this, like not getting vaccinated, believing all these conspiracy theories and wasting our energy and time on that, just, you know, it definitely has an impact, a real world impact in our community.
So I'm just here highlighting the article that you were referencing. Folks can check it out at anticonquista.com. Again, that's anticonquista.com, and the title of the piece is "Anti-Vaxxers Are Gaining Dangerous Ground in the Latinx Community." So we definitely encourage everyone to go. Please check that out.
And in fact, we do also include a bit on David Icke and show proof that this guy is earning millions from this bullshit that he's spouting. So, you know, it's not just this harmless hobby or this like harmless idea that people have. It's you know, people are making money, are being opportunists, and like Nick says, you know, our people are dying, or if they're not dying, our people are suffering economically because of it, and we're over here wasting our energy talking about conspiracy theories.
Absolutely. Now I'm highlighting something else that Comrade Nick sent this to all of us internally. This is a piece out of Cuba, a Cuban perspective on the anti-vaccination movement, and this was written in 2019 by 3 Cubans. And I just want to give them credit. So if you could just bear with me here. One of the authors' names is Belkis Maria Galindo Santana, a physician with dual specialties in family medicine and epidemiology, with a master's degree in epidemiology and doctorate in medical sciences. She's a full professor and senior researcher at the Tropical Medical Institute in Havana, Cuba. And then there's also Elba Cruz Rodriguez, physician with dual specialties in family medicine and public health and epidemiology. She's an assistant professor in Havana as well. And then Lina Lopez Ambron, let's see here, nurse specializing in public health and epidemiology with a master's degree in infectious diseases, a Ministry of Public Health, Havana, Cuba. And I wanted to read just 2 things out of this. So, and this was written in 2019. Here's the abstract of it. Just sort of kind of giving like an overview of what this whole thing is about. Vaccination is one of the most cost-effective interventions for control of communicable diseases. The health achievement could flounder if measures are not taken by health systems to prioritize immunization, increase vaccination rates, and educate health professionals to address public concerns about vaccine safety and efficacy. Parents' refusal to vaccinate their children directly affects public health because it puts both individual and group immunity in danger. Immunization coverage is effective only when high population coverage is attained. The growing number of anti-vaccination or anti-vaxxer groups around the world is alarming, contributing to falling vaccination rates. Troubling consequences include disease outbreaks in several countries globally and in our hemisphere. This article looks at the history and features of anti-vaxxer movements around the world and proposes ways the Cuban health system, through its national immunization program, can address dangers for the population associated with potentially negative influences of social network anti-vaxxer campaigns. The paper underscores the role of mass and social media, health professional training and sustained competence, and the importance of vaccine-related adverse events surveillance system. And then if you could just bear with me here, just want to read the conclusion. Let's see here. Vaccination is the most effective preventative health intervention after clean water in terms of cost-benefit balance and control of communicable diseases. But the growing refusal of parents to vaccinate their children as a result of misinformation spread on the internet by anti-vaccination groups put global public health in danger of outbreaks of diseases such as measles and diphtheria. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly. High immunization coverage, over 99%, has been achieved in Cuba with 11 vaccines against 13 diseases administered in the National Vaccination Program, and there are no reports of vaccination refusal. There is public trust in the program and satisfaction with its implementation. Cuban parents consider child vaccination to be a personal and social responsibility. While this is the situation now, we cannot ignore the danger posed by anti-vaxxer messages. Cubans have steadily growing have steadily growing access to the internet, both to scientific information and to misinformation. So effective education and communication strategies are needed for health professionals and the public they serve to maintain gains in control of infectious diseases. So Nick, thank you for sending that. If anyone's interested, they can reach out to us, and we'll send it out to you. If you can find it online, it's a very easy read. It's like 9 pages or something like that. But I mean, you know, and so it's almost an hour now that we've been talking. My father had open heart surgery yesterday. He's in stable condition. He's good. 100 years ago, my father would be probably dead. He had a heart attack. They realized he had a heart attack. He'd probably be dead in another week or so, maybe a month, right? We've made so many advances in science and technology. And for people to just to begin now to become anti-vax, anti-science is a step backwards. It's just absurd. It's ridiculous. The world is much smaller now. The globe is much smaller now. If I got the Pfizer vaccine, if there was some real legitimate threat posed to the population by this vaccine, we would have known by now. Scientists would be up in arms globally, not just in the US, to say, people, please do not take that vaccine because it could do this, it can do that, so on and so forth. Every drug, every medication has a side effect, potential side effects, including up to death. The idea with vaccinating the entire society is that when you vaccinate an entire society, when you do the cost-benefit analysis, if you will, if you do nothing, millions of people die by X disease. If you vaccinate the entire population, will a small marginal group of people get some sort of side effects like any other drug, including up to death? Yes. Right? So that's when you juxtapose both worlds, fully vaccinated society versus not fully vaccinated society, the answer is simple. You vaccinate the entire society because that saves the most amount of lives. That creates a safer environment for everybody in that society. That's the direction that Cuba has taken for itself. That's the direction that China has taken. It's the logical conclusion when presented with this type of a problem.
Yeah. And if I could just talk about that article real quick.
Yeah.
One thing that stood out to me was, first of all, you know, oftentimes in science, and they talk about this, there was an article that came out in the early 2000s, which really kind of kicked off the anti-vaccine movement. And it really was a movement that started amongst parents for their children. And that article that originally kicked off the movement was retracted several years later. But people don't talk about the retraction. They talk about the article being published. And it's interesting because there was I think a news article in thinking like Fortune or Forbes or something like that talked about how about 130 or 140 COVID-related scientific studies had been retracted since the beginning of the pandemic. And so with all of these like retractions in these scientific journals, basically they're saying there's not enough evidence to go around to prove certain things. Oftentimes too, there's lawyers, there's corporations who are paying certain researchers to put out certain information that would benefit their side. And that's what we saw early on in the 2000s when the anti-vaccination movement first started, or that research first came out. Because I think too is like the vaccination movement is not unique. It's not new, right? When they came out with the vaccines against measles and mumps and rubella, which, you know, I've worked in the healthcare industry, so I've had to get these vaccinations. And vaccinations are mandatory already. Like if you work in the healthcare industry, you got to get them. So when these vaccinations first came out in the 70s and the 60s, one thing that Cuban article talked about was there was a huge anti-vax movement that came up about it, mostly in the UK, but also a little bit here in the US. And what happened was people stopped getting vaccines. And so there was a reemergence of diseases that had never been seen before. Like the whooping cough was apparently in the 70s, like all throughout the UK. Measles, a bunch of cases of measles started coming back up. So, you know, things that are completely preventable and that we could easily have stopped are being brought back up just because people are, you know, unwilling to listen to the science. And And I think too, we haven't really talked about this yet, but I think to some extent, like for some groups and some populations, I understand the hesitancy towards like towards listening to science. Like, look, I'm Puerto Rican, right? I could understand Puerto Ricans coming out and saying, look, they told us they were giving us birth control in the 30s to the 70s, but they were sterilizing our women. And they did that to a third of Puerto Rican women. I could understand being hesitant of any medical procedures after knowing that history. The Tuskegee experiments, I could understand like the history of like the historical racism within the medical industry, especially in the West, towards our people specifically. I understand that hesitancy, right? Do I think it applies in this situation? No, but I understand why it would take some people some time. But I think for the most part, that's not what we're dealing with. What we're dealing with is like, especially when it comes to COVID, is like Vic said earlier, it's tied back to these right wing, mostly like white supremacists, just extremists out like totally out there positions, and it's mostly coming from white folks who are middle class and suburban, who are fighting against this mandates because of freedoms and liberties, which if you're a socialist in the first place, you'll know that you don't even have those already. So like, it's all a bunch of bullshit, and they try to use our historical trauma, the racism that we face. They try to use that as justification as to why they can't, why we should be distrustful, and that's bullshit in my opinion. Like you can't, that's disrespectful. That's disrespectful to the millions of people that had to go through that. You know.
Carlos or Nick, any closing thoughts on this this topic, which is very I know controversial and could be contentious.
I think this last bit has been great, because especially like showing the Cuban academic paper and emphasizing that we need to look at serious studies. We need to be scientific in our thinking if we want to call ourselves socialists or communists. And so I would again, like going back to the fact that the majority of our people don't have access to these tools, to these resources. But there are ways we can, like for example, I'm in academia, so I have access to certain tools that the majority of our people don't have access to. But there's things like Google Scholar. Google Scholar is a great tool for people to use if they want to look up like reliable sources of information. Of course, politically, socialists, we need to kind of filter out, like there is going to be, again, going back to what Nick was saying earlier on, like there's a difference. There's the capitalist state and their conspiracy, which isn't based on this loony thing. It's a logical. It's wrong, and we oppose it, but it's logical because it's they're trying to impose a system, a way of thinking that makes sense because they make money out of it, and because that's how capitalism works. And then there's obviously the conspiracy theories are based on on I don't know, believing in aliens without any proof and no empirical evidence. So the point is, we do need to start finding more reliable sources of information. I think Google Scholar, when it comes to, especially like I researched Latin America, and looking at the situation in Latin America politically, if you want to understand Latin America from like a academic point of view, and you're not in academia, Google Scholar is great. Like put Latin American socialism in Google Scholar, and you're going to find like super reliable sources, a lot of left-wing stuff, a lot of socialist stuff, some right-wing stuff. But if we're scientists, we have to read that kind of shit as well. So yeah, that would be my last suggestion in all of this is for us to to use tools like Google Scholar, or look up, let's try and make a list, or build resources of information, books and authors who are reliable authors who aren't just wacky priests and and conspiracy theorists and so on.
So my last bit on this is that I have a link here. It's titled "Manifest Destiny and Military Interventions." A careful examination of U.S. foreign policy history reveals over 400 overt military interventions and over 6,000 covert interventions, each one a violation of international law and each an act of war against a sovereign nation. So in this link that I have, here's a partial list of interventions with the purpose of effecting regime change, attempting or materially supported by the United States, whether primarily by means of overt force. So each one of these is titled either OF or CO for covert operation or subverted election, SE. This is like stuff that's just well documented, that's on record. So I know we were just talking about health and science and COVID-19, but just in terms of interpreting the world and understanding who's your enemy, like imperialism is the primary contradiction. And it's not, it really, once you go down this path, it's really not that hard. What just Carlos was just saying, it's not that hard to be able to piece this thing together, because we have so many historical documents, CIA's that's the government, by our own government's, United States government admission. There's many atrocities that have been committed in the name of, national security or whatever. And so it's, I please, just the whole point of this is to have a discussion, yes, but to really, really get our people to focus on being scientists, real scientists, right? Scientific socialists, if you want to consider yourself a social scientist because you don't identify with socialism or communism, whatever. It's, you should draw to the same conclusion, because facts are facts. The evidence is the evidence. So that's my final piece. I thought today's topic was interesting. We got 35 people watching, and we're like about an hour in. So unless there's anything else, let's go ahead into the headlines. Give me just a second here. All right, here we go. So let's go to Nicaragua. More Western media attacks on Nicaragua. We have a Reuters headline which reads, "Lost Hope. Ortega's crackdown in Nicaragua stirs fast-growing exodus." And so the piece highlights some unknown activist named Jesus Adolfo Tefel, who was just like a business owner at some point, and the government did accuse him of planning terrorist acts. And so he was in jail for a while. He's now out, and I think he took off. And then it highlights that thousands are leaving Nicaragua to neighboring country Costa Rica, stating in the piece, they state that it's the biggest exodus since the 1980s. And I thought it was interesting that Reuters went right to the State Department and right to the Department of Homeland Security. And so the State Department said the following. This is a quote. And this is just from a random spokesman. There's no person who's attributed to the actual quote. "What we are seeing in Nicaragua is an escalating climate of repression, fear, and hopelessness," end quote. And then the Department of Homeland Security did not respond at all. But I thought it was interesting that Reuters went to them as some sort of credible source for this particular piece. But again, the reason why we're going to continue to do this every single week is because these headlines continue to get ratcheted up in the Western media. Any thoughts, fellas, before we go to the next headline?
I think this is a great it's a great example of the real conspiracies, the imperialist conspiracies. That to some people will be like, nah, that can't be. The U.S. wouldn't send funding and wouldn't train the opposition in Nicaragua and elsewhere. But yeah, no, there's definitely evidence for it, and that's why we do. Again, I think we've said before, like I personally do think, I have my criticisms of the way things are being done in Nicaragua, but at the end of the day, as we always say, like that's for the Nicaraguan people to resolve. That's for them the revolutionary people of Nicaragua can have in the past resolved their own problems and leave them to it. And we know that this particular case and this particular period, because of the elections coming up, is a period where the imperialist powers are pushing. And it's not a conspiracy theory. It's very much a fact that you can look up, that the United States the United States and the Western world and the imperialist world in general are attempting to to make sure that at least the progressive, the left in Nicaragua don't continue on in power.
Nick, anything to add? No, I mean, I agree. I think Carlos put it well. This is really this is the conspiracy theories that we really should be focused on and should be talking about.
Absolutely. Another headline here. This one came from our colleagues, I could say colleagues, if you will, Orinoco Tribune. Shout out to them. Nicaragua and Iran continue to create ties to combat imperialism as Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega and Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi, hope I pronounced that correctly, conversated this past Tuesday night. Orinoco Tribune ran a very, very concise piece, and I would encourage everyone to check that out. Heading over to Cuba. Cuba is on a mission to reach near full immunization. Yes, Cuba believes in vaccinations against COVID-19, including vaccinating its nation's children. Currently, about half of Cuba's population has received at least one dose of a vaccine. 3.5 million of 11 million plus residents are fully vaccinated. And so, again, Cuba is tackling this issue head on, and they're not going to slow down. They want to do this by the end of the year.
But real quick too on that, like just to go back to that article from the Cuban physicians. You know, they don't even in Cuba. They don't have. I was trying to look this up whether or not they have like mandated vaccines, and they don't even have that because they've established so much public trust amongst the people and the healthcare systems that they don't need to do that because people are. And they talked about that in the article. People are looking to get their vaccinations. They want to get their kids vaccinated. They actually have so much trust in their system that they'll do that voluntarily. Which is the point which is what we would hope to be at, right? Which is a type of system that we would want to emulate, but we don't have that.
I have a friend who she actually lives here she's originally from London, but she lives in Cuba now. She did come back a few months ago here to stay here for a while, and she didn't foresee staying. She stayed more than a few months more than she intended to, and she was devastated that she couldn't get the Cuban vaccine because they offered it to her, and she ended up getting the vaccine here in the UK. But yeah, like she was telling me, like just as Victor and Nick have been saying, like the people of Cuba trust their government. Like they trust them not because they're gullible, as a lot of us are with the governments that we live in, or the countries that we live in, and trusting our governments blindly. No, they trust their government because they're very well educated citizens, and yeah, it's awesome. It's great, awesome news. That little island that has been strangled with economic warfare for decades is able to advance scientifically beyond any other country in our region, who have all the money, all the technology, all the capabilities to do it, but don't have the will to do it because, we know why.
I want to add that the Cuban scientists have reviewed the literature on the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, and they don't have any issues with either of them. So I just, it's really important for people to, because people say, well, you can't compare, for hardcore leftists or fringe leftists or whatever the hell you want to call them, who say, well, I trust the Cuban vaccine, but I don't trust, Pfizer's vaccine. Well, the Cubans have studied those vaccines, and they don't have they have a different technology that they're using, but they have no issue with the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine. So it's just important to put that out there. I mean,
right.
Just, again,
yeah. And I just want to say that my friend, when she was like, I wish I would have gotten the Cuban vaccine, not because she thought that it was more effective or anything like that. It's more like, I have the Cuban fucking vaccine, which is cool to be able to say, but yeah.
I think
get vaccinated. Just get vaccinated with whatever fucking vaccination they're gonna give you.
Right. I think I don't know if you feel the same way, but I would feel the same way too. If you if you put in front of me, hey Vic, you could take the Pfizer vaccine or you could take the Cuban vaccine. I'm gonna take the Cuban vaccine 100 times out of 100 times. That's not even a question. I don't think any communist probably. I would love to meet a communist that says, no, give me the Pfizer one. Like, but I just had a question. That's a matter of pride, right? You're going to take the Cuban one, right? I would take the Russian one over the American one. I mean, I would. What is it? The Sputnik. But I don't have that available to me. I have the Pfizer, so that's what I'm taking.
Right, and I just want to add too. Like, think about like Cuba. Why can't they do exactly what Pfizer or Moderna did? Well, one, because intellectual property rights, right? They'll get sued right off the bat. And two, they don't even have like because of the blockade and the sanctions, they don't have the technology to replicate exactly what they did there. So it's like they like you said, they do approve of the science, they agree with the science, and they think it works out, but they don't have the technology to replicate it. So of course their vaccines are going to be different, right? And you got to take into consideration the context and the actual material conditions, like we've been saying, of what's going on right now.
Absolutely. And actually, I got a piece on intellectual property. It's ironic, but I'll get to that in a little bit. But according to The Hill, a new poll shows Americans favor diplomacy over imperial aggression. The poll also shows Americans don't see Cuba as a top issue at all. The poll also shows that Americans are unconvinced that the embargo has worked. So for those of you who believe in quote unquote liberal democracy, there's your democracy right there. Americans don't support our position, our foreign policy position on Cuba, yet Biden is moving more and more. He's basically he's moved to the right of Trump, essentially, taken on his positions and extended those, and then also has levied a series of different sanctions and started ratcheting up the belligerent rhetoric. In Al Jazeera, so we talked about, I believe last week, it might have been the week prior, about the open letter coming out of Cuba to President Biden on COVID-19 vaccines for Cuba. It's for folks who are interested. I really strongly suggest it's and you could also sign on to the letter. I really strongly suggest folks read the letter. There's three major points in the letter. But if you just Google Al Jazeera Cuba, it should pop right up. I really strongly encourage the audience to check that out. Moving on to the next headline out of Cuba, Chinese President Xi Jinping talks to Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel. It has been revealed that President Xi Jinping has made a commitment to Cuba in building socialism and pursuing common development. Many people are interpreting that as that. I guess the one criticism that I personally have of China is that they're not doing enough. And so my hope is that we can take this small island of 11 million people, and if China is willing to really be in solidarity with Cuba to help it in terms of its production and manufacturing and basically an economic development, and turning that small island, which seems to be trapped in a time warp, to let's develop the country, right? Let's develop the country. And China could do that. It's a small island of 11 million people. It could also, in terms of branding, if you will, I hate to use that term because it's more like a capitalist term, but that if we could make Cuba, if we could turn it into that paradise, right? That utopia, if you will, I think it's in China's even own best interest to do something like that. So again, I don't know. We'll have to see what happens, but there's obviously a really good relationship there, and I just hope China does more with the question of Cuba on the question of Cuba. Moving on to the next headline. So this is right out of the Grandma paper. Chinese vaccine Sinopharm administered with Soberana Plus and Cienfuegos. That's the headline. So essentially, what they're doing is that it's a combination treatment to maximize the effectiveness against the COVID-19. So they're doing this in Cienfuegos. They said, look, this is not like some sort of experimental thing. Like, this is something that we're going to be doing. And so I thought that was interesting, that they're going to be again using this combination treatment of the Chinese vaccine with one of the Cuban vaccines. Off air, we were talking about, and good old Papa Dios and Jesus Christ Incorporated is in the news in Cuba as Miguel Díaz-Canel met with the different church leaders and religious leaders, and to try to figure out how to essentially collaborate, the state and the church, right? And so, yes, Cuba is led by is led by the Communist Party, the Cuban Communist Party. That's who's in power, and many of those in the leadership are straight up atheists. Yet they work directly with the churches and the religious community. Orinoco Tribune has another headline that I thought was interesting. Cuba denounces the theft of its COVID-19 vaccine information. So this is what I was talking about before, and I'm just going to pull it up. Give me just a second here. Let's see here.
Yo, real quick, while you're pulling that up, I'll speak on the religious piece about Cuba. Because when I went to Cuba, we actually spent like half a day with some I think a Santeria, someone who follows Santeria, which is really popular on the island, and if you know about the history of Cuba, you'll know for a while they actually had banned and shut down a lot of churches, specifically going after the Catholic Church, but eventually they brought it back to the island. And one of the things they talked about, like at least on the tour when it came to Santeria, was a lot of people are spiritual. Maybe not as overtly religious as we think, but they are very spiritual. But their spirituality doesn't get in the way of recognizing who they are as Cubans, right? Or they're like who they are politically, especially in the international scene, like as Cubans who are under a U.S. blockade, what they're fighting for, the revolutionary legacy of Cuba, and all of that. That I think it's important, like we were talking about before, that the religion and the spirituality doesn't disempower the people, and it still leaves them with power to see that they can see them within themselves.
Absolutely. Again, you're not going to take Papa Dios away from our people. That's just the reality, and it's just a matter of And I would suggest for people to check out Fidel Castro interviews, specifically on the topic of religion. I believe there's a whole book. I believe, I think I have it on my shelf. I have not read the book on that particular book, but I have read other interviews that Fidel Castro has done on the question of religion. But the one book I was just mentioning is I think it's called Fidel Castro on Religion, and it was in discussions with Frei Beto. So definitely, I got it. I think I got it on my shelf, and eventually I'll get to it. But it, it's important for people to understand that relationship. And he said often, like, our issue with the church initially wasn't because of the fact that they were mere believers, but it was because of their opposition to the revolution and their counter-revolutionary activities. And so you had that dialectics. It's been happening since 1959. Carlos, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else, Carlos, before we move on.
No, the only thing is, remembering what you were saying, Victor, about your mom being like super religious. I grew up in a lefty household, and it's funny because my mom is like supposedly not religious, but now and again she'll be like, sometimes I pray just in case there is a God. It just goes to show like the conditioning of God and Jesus and our people in our community is crazy, but
No, so hold on, y'all gonna laugh. I'm gonna make hopefully I can make the audience laugh too. So I'm an atheist. I just don't believe in anything. I just don't. That being said, I will admit to that in certain sticky situations, in certain things, every once in a while, I have gone to my mom and said, "Mom, listen, I don't believe in any of this stuff, but because you do, I need you to pray for me on this one particular issue." It's very selfish of me or whatever. And I'm like, maybe you know something I don't. But yeah. So I do the same thing as your mom too. I'm like, just in case in this situation, Mom, can you, and it's kind of,
and you know what? It's like, it's so embedded in our culture as well. Like in Colombia, I don't know if I assume it's the same where you guys are from. Like when you're leaving or when you're saying, let's say I'm saying I'm going to go to Colombia next year. Voy a ir a Colombia si Dios quiere. but like even if you're not religious, you say shit like that.
Yep.
Like sometimes I hear my parents saying shit like that, and I'm like, what you mean? So you're scared of butt? But yeah, it's just embedded in our culture and our people.
Absolutely. Forget it. To this day, I go see certain aunts and something like, and and when I leave, it's they do the whole thing on me, like and they give me the kiss on the cheek, or like it's just part of our people, man. It's just one last thing I'll say. I always tell when we have these conversations, philosophical conversations, my mother and I told her, I said, I've got her to, I've convinced her that if Jesus was a real historical figure, that he was indeed a socialist, that he was a revolutionary. And so she's kind of bought into that. And I think that's how we should win over our people. It's like, and that speaks to liberation theology in the whole bit. So, I do tell mom.
Sorry, Victor, there's a great lecture by Omali Eshatella, and I think it's called If Jesus was a socialist, why is your pastor an Uncle Tom? Something like that.
Okay.
It's a great lecture. And he talks about that, like, kind of showing the revolutionary traits of Jesus, also the historical and political context of the region at that time, and why, like, the people of that region were like fighting the Romans and so on. So really, like, that they were fighting imperialism. I wouldn't really go to that to kind of inspire me on anti-imperialism, but if you're religious, maybe it'll work.
Right. I told the anecdote in the private chat that I know a particular communist, and I won't mention her name. I know a particular, she's hardcore. Like, if a theory, just amazing. A communist in the Dominican Republic who goes to church every single Sunday, and she doesn't believe in God, but she pretends that she does every Sunday, and throughout her whole life. Her whole thing is she's in the churches. And I say, but you don't believe in God. She says, I'm telling you, you know that. She goes, these people don't know that, and so she's organizing our people. And she does the whole liberation theology thing, essentially, but she doesn't believe in God at all. But everybody in the community believes that she believes in God, like everybody. Maybe
we should start doing that. These podcasts. Maybe we'll get a few more hundred people watching.
Yeah. But I thought that was hilarious. It was just so. I had a whole conversation with her about it. I'm like, I almost said her name. I said, why do you do this? And she's just like, listen, this is how I got to get to my people. This is where they're at. So this is how I got to get to my people.
I'm not gonna lie, I've done that once before. Actually, I've done that recently with a mutual aid group. They ended up being a church, and I ran into them. I didn't know who they were, and they were religious, and I was like, oh shit. It's like I definitely stand out here, but you just blend in with the crowd.
Right.
You say the amen.
Right.
No doubt. As a Latino, you don't stand out because they will just assume that you're religious.
Right.
I think the majority of the people, when they ask me about God, and like my own Latino people, and they ask me about God, and I tell them I'm atheist, sometimes I'm like, should I even tell them I'm atheist?
Right.
I tell my family I'm atheist, and they're like, oh, so you believe in the devil?
Right. Yeah, no, it's interesting. It is interesting being a Latin American Latino and being a communist and being atheist, because you're in the minority. Like, let's be honest, right? So, anyways, continue on with the headlines. Another shout out to Orinoco Tribune. Got a piece in there. Cuba's central bank announces cryptocurrency regulations. Cuba's central bank signed a resolution announcing the regulation. The resolution aims to, quote, establish the rules based on which the Central Bank of Cuba regulates the use of certain virtual assets in commercial transactions and the licensing of virtual asset service providers for operations related to financial exchange or activities in and from the national territory, end quote. There's really no much further news on that, but it's sort of like, again, Cuba's going to be methodical. They're going to have these little baby steps as they roll this stuff out, and we're going to keep monitoring. Now turning over to Mexico, see how we're at 1:30. So I'm gonna skip around here with some of the articles just to make sure that again, we're respectful of everyone's time. Let's do this. Let's give me just a second here. Let's just say, okay, so there's a migrant caravan heading over to towards the U.S. From Mexico southern border. Many on the caravan or part of the caravan are Central Americans and Haitians, according to Reuters. They say fleeing poverty and violence are the reasons they are making the trek to the U.S. And that's sort of the backdrop to the following, which is Mexico and U.S. The U.S. will dialogue on September 9th to talk about immigration, security, and economics. And I thought it was interesting that Manuel, the president of Mexico, AMLO, or Andres Manuel López Obrador, is urging Biden to help migrants attain work visas. He also once again criticized the Merida initiative for closer economic ties and pursuing economic development. According to the U.S. State Department, the Merida initiative is an unprecedented, quote-unquote, unprecedented partnership between the U.S. and Mexico to fight organized crime and associated violence while furthering respect for human rights and the rule of law, based on principles of common and shared responsibility, mutual trust, and respect for sovereign independence. Two countries have built confidence that has transformed the bilateral relationship. However,
yo, Victor, real quick, you're going in and out. It's hard to hear you.
Am I?
Yeah.
Okay. How about now?
That was a little bit better.
Okay. So whether over here is okay. I don't know what's going on with my internet. But essentially, AMLO, the president, Mexican president, criticized the current relationship that they have with the United States, in terms of, the way they deal with one another. And so there's an initiative that's in place. It's called the Merida Initiative. And really much of the funding has gone towards like private defense contractors, and really nothing has gotten done. And AMLO is pretty much saying, like, look, let's focus on helping migrants get work visas. Let's focus on forging closer economic ties and pursuing economic development, as opposed to this other thing of fighting drugs with the military and the contractors and the whole bit. I'm not sure if you folks wanted to respond before we move on to the next headline.
No, so because you were going in and out a little bit, that was mostly AMLO basically had he has a program for migrants now, right, in Mexico.
Well, he's encouraging. There's this tit for tat going back and forth between Mexico and the United States, and he's continuing to urge the Biden administration to push for visas, work visas, given that people apply to certain programs and do it the quote unquote right way and whatnot. And so they're going to meet soon in September 9th. The relationship between the former President Trump and current President AMLO was sort of a rocky relationship. They dealt with certain things. They were able to agree on certain things. They weren't able to agree on other things. And so they're hoping that this is going to be like a reset on September 9th, where AMLO wants the focus to be on economic development, on trade, on business, as opposed to the Merida initiative.
Right. I think so. My thing on that article is it's interesting, the timing. The Supreme Court of the United States recently said that they basically said that the Biden administration should reinstate this act that came up under Trump. It was called the Stay in Mexico Act. Mm-hmm. And so they're trying to force the Biden to reinstate this act, which I guess would affect the talks that he has with AMLO. But it seems like the Biden administration doesn't want to do that. So it's gonna be interesting. I think, again, the immigration thing, in my opinion, in the United States is probably one of the biggest issues, and that should be like the number one thing that people are paying attention to right now, because it's control. I don't think a lot of people understand it, but it's control of labor. It's control of labor that's super exploited, that, you can treat people like garbage. You could pay them less than minimum wage. You don't have to give them healthcare benefits or any of that. And it's our people, again, this ties back to the whole COVID thing. It's our people who end up suffering as essential workers or in extreme poverty and such. So, immigration is important, especially to the imperialist nations when it comes to their labor.
Carlos, anything to add?
No, the only thing I would add is that I did see a video online, I think on Instagram, of like Mexican immigration patrol, kind of separating families is what the caption was. and it did look quite fucked up. You know, and I'm not, you know, again, like, and on the topic of reliable sources, which is, you know, we've been emphasizing the whole show. I'm not quite sure how true this is, but yeah, you know, it's important to again emphasize that, you know, AMLO does good shit. There's also some shit that can be criticized. I'm not sure if this particular case is down to him particularly. You know, most likely not. But yeah, you know, it's a super hard situation there in Central American for Central American people, Central American migrants in Mexico and the US. And yeah, and like you guys were saying, that we definitely need to pay more attention to that.
Absolutely. Moving right along. Let's see here. According to a piece in Telesur, the Áñez regime tried to assassinate Evo Morales in 2019, according to some information that came out of Mexico. So again, for the sake of time, you know, for folk, if you want to check out the rest of that, just, you know, again, Google Telesur, you know, Morales, and it should pop up right. It should pop right up. Let's see here. Moving over to Colombia, President Ivan Duque's disapproval rating is now up to 75%. So his approval rating is 25%, disapproval rating 75%. Poverty is now up 42% in Colombia, and unemployment rate is now steady at around hovering at 15%. Carlos, I know you do a lot of work around, you know, the movement there in Colombia. Anything you would like to add to that?
Yeah, again, like emphasizing as we have been doing in all of the shows so far, like as a diaspora, as a Colombian diaspora particularly, we need to be focused on, you know, it's great to see like his approval rating is so low, but this has to also translate more tangibly in terms of the, you know, how we vote next year. I think it's an excellent, great opportunity for a progressive government in Colombia finally. You know, just to remind everyone that we in Colombia have not had a progressive government. I'd say probably the most progressive government was Alfonso López Pumarejo back in the 1930s, and he was right wing as fuck, but had some affinities to trade unions, and there were some reforms there, but nothing like what we've seen in, you know, more progressive parts of the region, Cuba, Venezuela, Bolivia, etc. So yeah, you know, this is a perfect opportunity for us to move on, for us to, you know, bring about a progressive government and be realistic. You know, it's not going to be a socialist or a revolutionary government. If it's Gustavo Petro, which is the more likely candidate to come to power, you know, he's still within the boundaries of capitalism in terms of his ideology. Again, like, you know, we hope to see reforms, but most importantly, what we need is somebody like him to come to power, so that there's some kind of leverage for political freedoms, for people to organize, for people to become more radical, for there to be space to organize and meet. And because right now in Colombia, as you guys know, is super fucking difficult to be a leftist. You could get killed and or disappeared or jailed or so on. So yeah, hopefully somebody like Gustavo Petro or even somebody more radical comes to power, and we can finally turn the tide in Colombia, just as we're seeing in Peru. Though again, in Peru there are, you know, some issues that have come up, but yeah, hopefully we see something like Peru.
Nick, anything to add?
No, I mean, I think Carlos put it well.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go back. Let's go back over to Central America and Caribbean. Someone's asking us to talk about El Salvador. I was gonna. What I was gonna do, again, for the sake of time, was probably at some point I'm gonna do something a little bit more in depth on El Salvador. We have direct sources, primary sources in El Salvador, and so there's a lot happening there. But just let me, I was gonna skip over it this week, and I do apologize, only for the sake of time. But being that somebody's asking, the Supreme Court has ruled that the country's president can serve 2 consecutive terms. This has created even again. There's some weird thing happening between El Salvador and the U.S. Even the U.S. rebuked that. A legal reform passed to fire. Another thing happened. A legal reform passed to fire all judges over the age of 60. This new purge law also affects prosecutors and other judicial branch employees. And so the idea with this is that the president, President Nayib Bukele, is going to essentially have this purge of the entire justice system, so he could put his people in there. And his party is in control of Congress as well. So it's not the situation there in El Salvador we have to keep monitoring it because it's getting very tense there. Just something else to throw at folks from in terms of what's happening in El Salvador, according to a recent poll conducted by the Central American University, shows a majority of Salvadorans do not want Bitcoin. The poll also reflects that 9 out of 10 people did not have a clear understanding of Bitcoin. 8 out of 10 say they had little to no confidence in its use. Meanwhile, the Salvadoran Congress has approved a law to earmark $150 million to act essentially as a startup money to create infrastructure for Bitcoin. There's a lot happening in El Salvador. I'm just going to leave it there unless you folks had something to add. But I promise in future episodes, we're going to get a little bit more in depth, possibly bring on a guest. And just to close out, just a couple things here in Peru. Keiko Fujimori, daughter of a dictator who was a recent presidential candidate, lost to the current president Pedro Castillo and claimed that there was fraud in the elections. She herself is now facing corruption charges, and she's the certain preliminary trials are now set to begin. I believe this. I don't know. I got to go back, and I think it was either this week or next week. They're set to begin. Last thing on Peru, and I know we wanted to have a little bit of discussion on this. I have my concerns about this, but the Castillo administration signed a deal with USAID, which has essentially been an imperial arm of the CIA. So your thoughts, comrades, on that deal with which we saw came through and it was celebrated on Twitter by USAID Peru.
I think we have to look into. I haven't really read into that properly, but just on the surface, I think that it is difficult to, and we have been saying this all along. We shouldn't get too excited with Pedro Castillo, not because we do think he's a comrade. We do think that he's got the right intention, but this is a democratic revolution, which means that it still has to act within the boundaries of the existing state, which means that they have to meet certain thing, that they have to allow certain things to happen. I'm assuming that whatever they signed with USAID is something they already had, or something similar to what they have, and they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to rock the boat in terms of trade with the US, which would mean that Pedro Castillo and his government is less likely to. Basically, what I'm saying is their thinking is probably, let's not rock the boat. We don't want a situation like Cuba or Venezuela where we're being where there's a blockade. I don't know. There's certain compromises that they have to make, and I guess our hope is that even though the USAID is definitely going to be in Peru during Castillo's administration, the hope is that there's some kind of measures and policies to restrict them, to make sure that they're not getting up to the shit that they usually go up to. And I'm sure if we see Castillo as a astute leader and his government as being progressive, I'm sure they'll have something in place, some kind of plan in place to make sure that they're not doing the shit that they usually go up to, which is basically the non-armed imperialist mission of the United States all over Latin America and the world. So I
agree with Carlos's analysis. Well, you look at where we started with this, and the getting rid of Hector Bejar, that was the first foreign minister, if I'm correct. He was a Marxist Leninist. He was very radical, very much accepting and open to Venezuela and Cuba. And when he was pushed out, well, first of all, he was pushed out by the military, by the Navy, and I think. At first, I was kind of skeptical of some of his claims and some of his interviews, but I see now a lot of what he was saying about there being a kind of a soft coup against Castillo's administration. And I think when he says soft coup, it's not necessarily a matter of kicking Castillo out of the presidency. It could just be a matter of seriously restricting and limiting what he can actually achieve. So only letting in some people into power and forcing kind of compromises where, all right, well, you're going to have to accept a foreign minister who is open to U.S. alliances or like USAID, probably various NGOs, etc. So it's very clear that the bourgeoisie in Peru and the institutions that they control, like the parliament, like the military, are going to put a lot of pressure on Castillo. And I think that'll be important to pay attention to and to kind of support Castillo when pressure is put on his administration.
Yeah. My take on it, and again, let me preface what I want to say by saying I too am in solidarity with the Castillo administration and that movement, because it is a movement, right? That being said, I do have that critique that I don't think that this should have been done, period. And I think, while I understand, and by the way, I'm always someone who says, and the audience has heard me say this before, that politics, it's a very crass, ruthless game. And we have to be very clear about that. And tenemos que tomar decisiones fríamente. Like, you have to be cold and calculated about the things that you do. So I'd be curious to see what the agreement is, what the details of the agreement are. But things like the USAID, NED, having military bases in our territories, like I do think that the left has to draw certain lines of you have to draw the line in the sand and say there's certain things that we won't accept and we won't tolerate. And so, this does make me nervous. So again, that's I'll just leave it. I'll just leave it there. I'll leave it at that. I'd be curious to see the details of the deal. And even like that, who knows if they're really telling you the truth anyways, right? So as long as they're there, they could say they're doing whatever the fuck they're doing in terms of, mutual aid and helping civil society and helping, democratic institutions foster, blah, 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 whatever the fuck that they claim that they're doing in Peru. Secretly, they could be doing something else, right? Clandestinely, they could be doing something else. And so I just, that's my thing with institutions like imperial institutions like USAID. It's like you're opening yourself up essentially for some type of subversive activity in your own country. So I just don't think these institutions have no places, have no place in our territories. They don't belong there. So that's my take on that.
I would also add, like, you know, I definitely, I obviously agree with you, Victor, but I also think like, you know, a new government like Pedro Castillo's, they have to choose their battles.
Of course. Of course.
They have to choose their battles, and something like this, you know, which to us, which to many of us isn't a minor thing. Like we know what the USA does in the region. So yeah, it's, you know, it's quite alarming, but yeah, you know, like we said, hopefully they have something in place, and also, you know, yeah, they hopefully just, you know, choosing their battles, and hopefully they make up for it elsewhere.
100%. Again, you have to be very cold and calculated. You have to be. This is a very dangerous game. It's a game of chess, and you have to be better than your opponent at the game. And you know, for those folks, for those hardcore communists and leftists and socialists in the Western world that from, you know, planet Mars want to, you know, again apply these purity tests to these movements. And to these leaders, understand that you're not there. You're not dealing with what they're dealing with. You're not, you know, those are the material conditions and that's the reality that they're dealing with right now. And so they're playing. They're in a constant game of, again, it's a game of chess. It's a political game of chess, and you just have to be better than your opponent. And again, and I think we mentioned this, Carlos. I don't think you were here last week. I think we mentioned this last week, where the goal is to be in power. The goal is to understand, point out, you know, map out all the institutions that are in the hands of the capitalist class, and either take it away from them, or create other institutions that will then eventually replace those institutions. And so that's the game. That's the game. So you know, without question, I hear what you're saying, and again, it just makes me nervous, right? The USAID, NED, you know, anything to do with the military, the U.S. military, or you know, intelligence community, you know, just it does make me a little nervous. But again, I totally 100% agree with what you're saying there.
My suggestion would be some agents, some double agents.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Being put up in there.
Absolutely. So, folks, we're almost at the 2-hour mark. Anything else before we get out of here? But again, folks can check us out at anticonquista.com. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're on Twitter. Please don't consider donating to us. Again, we've donated over $100,000 to revolutionary progressive organizations in Latin America and the Caribbean. So please check us out on all our platforms. Go online, support us if you could, share, like, subscribe. But folks, anything else before we get out of here?
No, just like you said, you know, emphasizing that again, like we all do this because we you know, we're interested in our region, but most importantly, we're interested in making a tangible change in the region, and that's why we do this. You know, we all of us are very busy, but we make time to come on here because we enjoy it, but most importantly, and I was thinking today, like, you know, activism, like. In my view, this is like a new form of activism. Activism in the real world takes a lot of time. Like you have to organize, you have to go to meetings, you have to go to protests. It takes a lot of your time, and so does this. To prepare for something like this, we have to read up, we have to do certain things. So that also takes time. We are sacrificing a lot of the time. We're sacrificing our own time to be here. But we don't see it. We don't really see it like that. We see it as a sacrifice for the movement, and yeah. So donate your money so we can send it back to Latin America and the Caribbean. You know, recently we sent to La Fuerza de la Revolución, which is a communist party in the Dominican Republic. Who else did we send to? I forget.
We sent $500 somewhere else recently. I'm forgetting. Carlos, I think you were the one who brought it up.
Carlos is the one who brought it up. I remember you also sent
it. Now I'm completely blank. I have no idea.
Okay. You see, to our audience, we this is what we do. We identify organizations, reputable organizations, and Carlos is drawing a mental blank right now. But this is what we do. We identify organizations on the ground doing things, actually doing things, and trying to make a difference. and we just
I know who. We sent £300 or dollars, I don't remember, to the women of of Marikana.
That's right.
The women of Marikana in South Africa, who are women who were victims of the Marikana massacre. Well, their family members were victims of the massacre, and they have some kind of group workshop in their community where they educate their people, give them access to computers, and anyway, all this like great stuff. And yeah, we felt like as Anti-Conquista, even though it's not our, we do consider ourselves, obviously part of the global South, but it's not necessarily our people from our region. But yeah, it's important for us to show solidarity to other parts of the world as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah, and obviously, with all the money that we get from our Patreon, we continue to send it all over the region. So please, yeah, do subscribe to our Patreon. And not just that, like Victor was saying, share our stuff, subscribe to our channel, follow us on all our social media platforms, and spread the word.
Right on. Nick, anything else?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll just echo what Carlos said. There's another group we gave money to right after. I think right after we gave money to Fuerza, we sent money to the Haiti Emergency Relief Fund.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Earthquake. So, even when things happen kind of like suddenly in Latin America, we've been able to quickly respond, which I think is good. We did that with Haiti, with Colombia. So it's been good. I think the work we've been doing recently is very good, and it's very important. And these streams too are also very important, just for doing the educating aspect, right? Both politically and keeping people educated with what's going on in the news. Because again, I think that's key, in my opinion. That's key to solidarity, is actually knowing what's going on in the world right now. Being that scientific socialist, doing those investigations into materialism.
Absolutely. All right, so let's end the episode there. Again, this is Anti-Conquista. This is Nuestra America. This was episode 11, Scientific Socialists versus Conspiracy Theorists, the struggle for Latin American critical thought. As always, we appreciate the audience. We can't do the work that we do without your support. And so until next week, everybody have a great Sunday. And hasta la victoria siempre. Cuídense.
Hasta la victoria. Take care, comrades.